was thinking.
And we're live.
Never lied.
Good morning,
And we're live.
everybody. Welcome to Code Noobs. How is everybody? Good morning, Randy and Danny. It is December 30th at exactly 9 a.m. right now. It's
Good
Christmas,
morning.
not Christmas. It's New Year's Eve.
Is it? Oh yeah, it is.
New Year's
Yeah.
Eve. Yeah. Merry New Year's Eve. Happy New Year's Eve.
Happy New Year's Eve.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
Looking
let's
forward to it.
before we get into today's topic, let's do a little yearly reflection, shall we?
All
And
right.
before we get into that, let's ask everybody who's watching the video today, what are you doing on New Year's? Do you
Yeah.
have New Year's resolutions around coding that are made? Let us know down in the comments.
Yeah, let us know what your New Year's resolutions are that you've made. Maybe coding related ones, even. Um, Maybe we should repeat that again in like 5 minutes when people actually join too.
That's a good idea.
All right. Well, yeah, I just wanted to do like a year of reflection. I know like we've had quite an interesting year. We've all taken on a lot of new things. So I did this with my girlfriend the other day, and we don't have to go crazy into it, but if you guys would like to share anything that's like, um, what were the questions now? I'm trying to remember them. So one would be, what was like one of the most impactful things that happened to you this year? Or like, what was like one of the most like life-changing things that's happened to you this year? You guys think of anything? I know these are like really tough questions.
Well, I can talk around coding a little bit. So, like, this
Okay.
year was a challenge for me because it was kind of where I decided to really pursue cybersecurity as opposed to just
Mm.
strictly coding. And this was a really difficult challenge because we had done the whole boot camp all together, and so like working on the stuff together was very enjoyable. But I knew for myself I had always wanted to do cybersecurity. Like ever since I saw the movie Hackers when I was a kid, I was like, I want to
Great
do
movie.
that. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
so actually like breaking off from doing the traditional coding to pursue more of the cybersecurity was very difficult because I had to kind of gap myself from what you guys were doing. But I was able to accomplish some cool stuff this year with doing that. Like I finished up my master's in cybersecurity. I also passed a couple exams, the CYSA, which is a cybersecurity analyst, and the pen test exam, the pen tester exam. So I've gotten to kind of move in that direction.
Very
That's
cool.
nice. That's
How about
awesome.
you, Danny? Anything super impactful this year?
I feel like I just learned a lot this year. I finished up a freelance project that was like really interesting and difficult and ended up being like, especially too, because at the end I ended up it was a small company. They had somebody managing their server that they fired, and I didn't know that. So then
Mm.
I took on the role of having to actually deploy the thing too on their server, which I originally was going to use the guy as help, obviously, because that's not like my
Yeah.
area. So that was cool. I learned a lot that I didn't know I could do, and that was really fun. And it's just also nice just to get like these things done and like get validation that you're actually able to do these things, that you want to do and that you're learning to do. It's awesome to do it.
Yeah, awesome. For me, I think there's two really. One is starting to work for a startup, because that's been like definitely something new for me. There's challenges involved with that. You know, it's a small team, and working as one of the two developers on that team is challenging in its own way. Sort of like to work with a team who doesn't understand development, try to build what they want, and then still have realistic expectations. So that's been interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know. I put that so
requirements and
nicely.
expectations are always fun.
And then the second thing is what we're doing right now. Like
Yeah.
this has been awesome, right? We're building this group for mentoring new developers. And I'm looking forward to the things that we're going to be doing in 2024 too, because I think that's when CodeNoobs is really going to take off. And I think a lot of people who are watching this, who are just getting a taste of what we're doing, would probably agree that there's something here, and we're only going to grow that and expand it more to build new awesome developers out in the workforce. So yeah. So,
2024 is going to be the year for CodeNoobs, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
So
my
for those of you just tuning in right now, let us know what challenges have you faced this year
yes,
and
let us know
what
in
things would you like to
comments.
see from Code Noobs in 2024?
That's a good one too. Yeah. Let us know what you would like to see us build and what would be helpful for you as a developer, because that helps us build the things that
You
you
want me?
need.
I'll add that question to the comments.
There you go. Um, all right. So my girlfriend actually just sent me a couple other ones because she's listening in. So, um, these are really good actually. Okay, we sort of said the first one, which is like, what are you most proud of this year? But if you guys want to comment on that, uh, you could further comment on that. But this is one that actually I thought of, or that she thought of, but
You're taking
I
credit.
thought is very important. No, credit. Sorry, I'm still half asleep. If you
I
can't
know. I'm
tell.
just kidding. It's all right.
All right. So this is like in 2024. What would you like to be acknowledged for? Like, what is something that you really want to be acknowledged for?
Acknowledge.
I'm looking at Randall because he just went into this like, you have an idea, or you're just thinking.
Yeah, I know. My
Oh,
big overall goal this year is to do the practical hacking certification. So the big one is OSCP, which is a basically it's like the golden standard for if you have this certification, it means that you can do practical penetration testing. But also there's a few other exams that kind of help work you up in that direction, like PMPT. And so I'm going to be working towards those and doing part of that that's challenging for me is learning Windows because I haven't touched Windows in like
mm,
20 some years. But and so like everything is frustrating, but I did get a nice big Windows book to help me with it. Windows
nice.
internal. This is only part one, and you can see how thick it is. So I'm
How
going to be
many
learning
parts are
Windows
there?
Active Directory, and this is kind of my, I guess, being acknowledged for delving into something that's super challenging for me, and then coming out the other end.
Nice.
The way you say that is just so appealing.
Very nice. It's good imagery though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the other
Provides
end.
good imagery.
Very nice. What about you, Danny? Anything you'd like to be acknowledged for in 2024?
Acknowledged for in 2024. Well, I'd like to keep expanding what I've been doing with Python and Django and get even more advanced in that. I'm also been working a lot with React now, Firebase, and I want to just keep expanding with that. I've been working on another project for actually for my partner for her own business, so that's cool.
Mm,
So really just yeah, keep doing that and just kind of validate and acknowledge myself as a developer in those areas as well too. Would be awesome.
yeah,
Keep
nice.
expanding and learning.
Yeah, I like that. I would like to be acknowledged for being a badass Next.js developer
Nice.
because I already know React really well and I'm starting to dig into Next and I just want to get to know it a little better, you
This
know.
is awesome. I actually like it.
It's
So
pretty
far, it's been
it's pretty
great.
sweet. Yeah. There are things where I'm like, okay, there needs improvement here, but it is fairly in terms of coding languages, it's
You
fairly
know,
new.
it's funny because speaking of our topic, when to learn language, right? It's funny because like I always notice too, when you switch to a new framework or a new language too, it's also like a mental switch you have to make. And like
Mm,
next is server side, so there's a different way of like understanding how things are relating that
yeah.
is very different from React because that's really more client side. So it does take like a mental shift to see,
Yeah.
why these things fit this way and why it works this way.
Yeah, totally. Um, and the last question is just what are you looking forward to the most in 2024? And I know
Ooh,
these are sort of similar questions, but
hanging out with you guys.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I
Yeah,
like
we've been discussing some pretty cool stuff coming up here for Code Noobs, and actually that's gotten me quite excited stuff to
Yeah.
work towards. So I think I'm very excited about that.
yeah, likewise. I'm very excited about that and what we're going to be offering and the people that we're going to be working with because this group has been awesome so far, and I'm only more excited to work with people in sort of like a more in-depth scenario as well versus just our
Yeah.
live streams, which are awesome. But um, anyway, so awesome. Happy New Year's Eve to everybody. And let's
Almost.
get into the topic today. So the topic is when to know that you want to change a coding language or learn something new. And uh, I guess really we can just dive right into it. I mean, I think there's a couple reasons why you would need to, and then maybe some why you would want to. But do you guys have any sort of like opening thoughts, anything that comes to mind when talking about this subject?
Well, I was thinking if we could all kind of give like a history of what languages we've learned and if we
Mm,
thought they were challenging or easy or fun or just, you felt like bashing your head against a wall. I thought that would be pretty
Okay.
interesting to start.
Yeah,
That'd be a
that
good
sounds
start.
good. I'll start.
Hmm.
I'll start
Yeah.
that.
All right.
I think the first language that I ever learned, or languages that I ever learned, were HTML and CSS. That was like years ago when I was doing SEO because I would build a lot of websites for small businesses. And I also learned because I was using WordPress a lot, I also learned a bit of PHP at the time because WordPress uses PHP. So those at the time were a bit confusing because I only like half-assed my learning, right? It was like,
Yeah.
how do I patch things together when they're broken on a WordPress site for the most part? I understood HTML very well, but CSS and PHP were confusing for me. I think the biggest thing with CSS was specificity and like the cascading nature of CSS. So I would like change something in a WordPress file and then not realize that somewhere else on that WordPress website there was like a more specific uh CSS query or whatever. So um it wouldn't change anything. So I ended up putting like exclamation point important on every single thing I ever did. Because I didn't know what I was doing, which is also bad practice. So just for anybody who's listening. Anyway, so that was sort of where I started. And then I went to college and I started in computer science and I learned Java and I actually quit computer science because of Java. So if that's any example of how sucky Java is, um, like it's
Java
just
does suck.
it is probably a
That's
little
why that's
better
why
now, but
all job postings are like Java developers wanted because
yeah,
nobody
there's
wants to
nobody
learn the damn language.
it's
Please
it
learn Java.
yeah. And at that time, that was back in like 2006, I think. And at that time, there were the IDEs that were available were horrible and didn't do like half of the stuff they do now, where they like show you errors before things compile and like all make code suggestions, things like that. Like that was the time where you missed a semicolon and you just sat there and figured it out. There was no, hey, you're like nothing would autofill. Like the other day I was coding and I have a tendency to just not even put in semicolons now when I write JavaScript because I know like Prettier will just do it for me. And so I was like, whatever, I'll just don't even write them anymore. And it just makes your code work. But back then it was like if you missed anything, it's on you to fix it. So I remember very specifically being in a coding lab, like in a computer lab for I think it was like 6 hours trying to debug something. And that was when I quit. I was like, I don't think I'm cut out for this. Which I wish I didn't. That was one of my biggest regrets. But I'm here. So no big deal.
Hey, it wasn't the right time. It
Yeah.
happens.
And
Yeah.
then
Um,
recently would have
so recently my main focus has been um React. So, we took like let's say this, before we did a boot camp, I had been already self-teaching myself HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Python through Code Academy and LinkedIn Learning and like YouTube. Um, so I learned like a bunch of that and also like Bash and stuff like that, like just command line. Um, and then we took the coding boot camp, learned a ton of stuff in there, outside of that. So like SQL, database management, APIs, that kind of stuff. But more recently, I've been pretty much specifically working on, I would say, full stack development. I built like my own web app, which I'm making money off of, which is really cool. That's like a huge accomplishment also for this year, to just build something like full stack on my own. Um, that was like, it took a lot of work, but it was worth it. Um, but like my main focuses are React. So that's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and like React, which is a JavaScript framework. And then I've been using a lot of Firebase because I think it just solves a lot of problems that you have with a normal backend, like setting up a server. It just makes the whole thing like way faster. It has like auth built in, everything. So you can build, your own web app in a much shorter period of time. So I've been mainly focused on that. And now I'm shifting a little bit towards Next.js because it's, the next step after React.
Well,
So I
as
have
long,
made
yeah,
this decision recently where I was like, I want to learn something new. I know React really well. So I wanted to learn Next.js, and that's sort of how I got where I am now.
nice.
How about you guys?
I well, I guess if I start go way back, I took HTML in high school, I remember, for web development, and it was just like HTML. Like I don't think anything else even existed at that point. CSS might have just come out. That was fun. That was interesting. It was very hard to make anything look like you wanted it to look. And everything kind of reminded me, like, back when the internet first started, everything just looked like a document.
Yeah,
Like it was all squares and
like a,
blocks and
a
stuff.
Word doc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, it took me a while to get back into it, but like I remember when even before we took the boot camp, I started learning Python, HTML, CSS, JavaScript through books. I was using Learn Web Development for HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then Python Crash Course, which I really enjoyed. It was a great book
Mm-hmm.
for learning that to begin with. Then we did the boot camp, and I just really liked Python and stuff. I started getting into the web development with that, full stack apps with Django, which I really enjoyed. Started doing freelance work for that. And so I just learned a ton in that area. I like full stack a lot. I like being able to build the
Yeah.
whole thing and manipulate data and allow users to log in and just do the whole sort of project. And I think like you said, like I really I've been learning a lot more. Like I'm pretty comfortable with React. I'm learning Next.js now. Firebase is really awesome because it does handle like dude, when I did that project for the freelance project, I was coding everything from scratch and like backend stuff. It requires so much logic that like Firebase does handle for you. It's nice. It makes it easy. Now, it's not good for every situation. And like for the circumstance of the company I was working
Yeah.
for, that wouldn't have worked. But like it does. It cuts out a lot of the time that you have to use, to build out authentication and all this other stuff. So yeah, it's been fun. So now I think I'm focusing more now on still full stack, but I'm trying to emphasize more React next, just to up my skills in those areas too, because they're important.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I started out when I was studying physics in undergrad. They taught us C and C++, and I struggled with that so much. I didn't understand a thing about it. And then I ended up doing senior research with a professor using Fortran, which is a
Mm.
language from
Yeah.
1977. And I graduated as the only person who knew that language because everybody else stopped using it. And so that's how I ended up getting a job as a developer when I graduated. But I didn't stick with that job for too long. And then it was really until I did some HTML and CSS doing some SEO back in the day, but it wasn't really until Python when I felt very comfortable with the language that I actually understood what I was doing, and I felt like I could actually write programs. That was that was when I really felt comfortable. And then after that, uh, messed around with some other languages like Golang, and uh, and then now with the stuff I'm doing for cybersecurity, knowing SQL is helpful, Bash is helpful, PHP is helpful. So like kind of knowing a little bit of everything is quite helpful. And
Yeah.
the C, C++, assembly, all this stuff, because it all pops up somewhere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just having exposure to that many different languages is helpful because then, you know, even if I don't have a resource to be able to go, I can kind of puzzle out what is going on just from all the other languages that I've seen.
Yeah.
It's cool. That is the cool thing that I noticed. Like I realized that after learning for a while, like, you know, I can look at any like coding language now and basically at least understand the core, like the basic structure and logic of it and what's supposed to happen, even if I can't write it. And I find that that's a really cool feeling to be able to just like look at them and kind of understand. And that just requires knowing a lot about different languages, so you know the different syntax and stuff. Yeah, it's very useful.
Yeah. Very cool. We got some comments too. I'm going to read them. Chris Edwards said HTML class in middle school 1998, coding summer camp in 2000, where we mostly played StarCraft, but we did learn some basic, and
StarCraft is good though.
GitHub in 2015. And here I am today. Weird road. Yeah, I think we are all sort of on that weird road. And that's just part of being a developer, right? It's like I think software development is just one of those things where you become super into it, and then something scares you off, but then you realize that it's really a passion of yours and you come back to it. Because I think we all sort of did that in one way or another, right? Like, yeah.
Mohammed said he's had a rough 3 months with on and off HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Yeah. I was going to mention this actually because you had said this, both of you, a little bit with Python. So like if I were to go back, I know in a lot of ways, like I tell people a lot, like you should just start with web development because that tends to be the direction of where most software development is these days, outside of like the realms of AI and machine learning. But I actually think that Python is a really good place to start for most people because it gives them that sort of core understanding of how development languages work in a way that's very human readable. So you can get the sort of mental concepts down before you go into like the crazier syntax of like C and JavaScript and all that stuff. So I did want to mention that as well.
I mean, that's one of the things that drew me to Python was like the readability. I really liked
Yeah.
the way it's structured, and like it was a good language to start with because I think it's dynamically typed, it's pretty easy to read, and it has really good um debugging, error checking, things like that. There's really good stuff out there too, and extensions for VS Code that make it very helpful when you're learning.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm
Go ahead.
glad you mentioned that because I was thinking about that too. Like I always think about this. If I could go back and start over again, knowing what I know now, what would I do? And my
Would
answer for this, even though Python super user friendly, very helpful to learn it, I would actually start just JavaScript and just go super
only
deep
learn
into
JavaScript.
JavaScript only.
Yeah,
Because and here's the reason why. It's just the whole entire web is built off of JavaScript.
it's
Like
true.
Yeah.
literally and the whole world is built off of the web. So like
Yeah.
not only can you build anything using JavaScript, but also it's super applicable to cybersecurity because some of the best hackers out there were just Java developers or
Yeah.
Yeah.
JavaScript developers. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where like if I could do it over again, I would probably do that. But the easier route would absolutely be going with Python.
Well, can I make a counterpoint to that though, which is
Mm-hmm.
I started with Python because I liked how it was written. It made more sense to me. I think part of that might have been coming from like academia. I read a lot of papers, and I think Python has an easy structure, but it helped understanding Python helped me learn JavaScript because once you know one language, like
Yeah.
it makes it easier. And I remember when I first looked at JavaScript, like not just the BS with like the web and the DOM, but like actually like JavaScript programming stuff, like it's more confusing like when you're coming at it with no background because
Mhm.
it looks weird. It's written kind of weird. There's a lot of weird shorthand, and knowing Python really helped me learn it faster. So I think it just depends on who you are and really what interests you. Because whatever makes you stick with coding is probably the best thing to start with.
Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day and like it sort of just blew my mind a little bit that when you think about JavaScript, I know it's a pretty complex for a lot of people and it makes sense because it is. There's a lot of like intricacies to it. But ultimately, when you think about it, JavaScript is all just about manipulating objects and
Yeah,
function and like functions that do that in some way. At its core, like that's all that it is. So if you can understand how an object works, how a variable works, and then how methods work, you basically know JavaScript.
yeah.
Now that's different knowing and doing. So I understand this complication there. But anyway, so let's go back to the topic a little bit because we are actually sort of running out of time. But the topic of today is when should you actually change a coding language or when should you learn something new? And so, can you guys think of like, I have a list here of different reasons why you would want to do that, but do you guys have any reasons why you would want to or have chosen different languages at different
Yeah.
times?
So I think my idea is kind of like getting into coding. You just kind of choose like the shiny object, like whichever. Generally, for me, it was like whatever book looked the coolest. Like that was how I got into coding,
Yeah.
and that was how I chose the language. And then after a while, you may lose interest in it, or it may get somewhat challenging, or there's a new shiny object, and you may go to that one, and then the next one, and the next one. And so that's I find that a lot of people that's what ends up happening is like it gets difficult, and then you switch around. That's what happened to me. Like I switched many, many
Yeah.
times until I really found my groove, like what languages I enjoyed the most and which ones I worked with. And that's a great method for doing it. There's something to be said for people who have only stuck with like one language. Like I meet developers all the time who like they've been coding
Yeah.
SQL for 15 years and they've never even looked at another language. Like they took a SQL course in high school and that's the only thing they've ever done. And it just
Yeah.
boggles my mind, but like the depth that they know about that stuff. So I think that for when to change languages, it especially early on, it's more important to stay interested in coding and stay involved in it. So, like, if you need to change a language to do that, or if you have a specific project in mind, changing to a language that's going to help you do that is more important than just trying to stick with one.
Yeah,
No,
I
I think
I agree
that's
with
a
that
good
a
point.
lot.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
keeping yourself interested matters the most out of anything. If that's what helps you stay focused, then just do that. Yeah.
yeah, I found that it really helps if you are trying to build a project, right? Or you have like that's sort of
Yeah.
how I've gone through my coding journey is continuously reorienting myself towards a project I want to build, right? That's how I got a job at a startup. That's how I've built my own web app. That's how I've learned new coding languages because every time, I want to build something like I know React Native because we learned it, but that's sort of my next step is I want to build more mobile apps and use React Native. That would be like my next I guess, learn coding language. Um, but it's always because I want to build something with it, right? And I think that helps sort of motivate you when things do get tough because inevitably they will, right? There's no coding language that's just easy all the way through. There's always going to be a point where you're like, this really sucks. And I don't really feel like reading 10 pages of documentation to figure out what's going on here, but you have to. So I think having that target in mind of where I'm going and then letting that lead you in what coding languages, because that is the truth too, right? Like project requirements are going to dictate at some point what languages or frameworks or libraries you need to know. And
Yeah.
that could be whether it's like your own project or when you get hired by somebody. Because if you do get hired by somebody, expect that things will change eventually. They're going to say, hey, we need to build something in with this and it uses Golang or something like that. And you're going to have to learn that. Right. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think, heading towards your passion when you're learning is really important. And then just letting the project requirements guide you when you're in a career or something like that.
I
Um,
think focusing on projects is such a good idea too, because I do that as well. It's how I learn. And I think you learn a lot more because it forces you to one to stick with it, but
mhm.
also to encounter real world problems that make you more advanced. Because when you jump around a lot, you tend not to do like I think the real deep sort of learning that's involved with completing
Yeah.
a whole project and actually learning how to deploy something and how to like do all these other things that are kind of like coding adjacent to and necessary for working with web apps or with apps in general or software. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good idea. And like you guys both kind of hinted at too, I think, projects also dictate it. So like a lot of times for me, like I might think of a new project I want to do, and then that might motivate me to learn something new because I realize that like it would be better done in a different framework or language than the one that I'm most comfortable with. And so that's always a good way kind of just to like motivate yourself to learn something new and learn it.
Yeah. I want to make a point about what you said too. And that is when you're learning, it's really good to follow along with projects, like find, people who are building a full stack project or whatever, a full project of some sort and following along with them. But after that, after you learn it a little bit, it's also really important to build your own project. And the reason why is when you're following a YouTube tutorial or whatever it is, like some coding
Yeah.
tutorial, they've already worked out all the problems. Like they've worked out all the hiccups and all the crap that's going to come up where they weren't expecting it. And then they're just retyping the code for you, right? So like when you see it, you're like, it's just everything works so seamlessly. It's so
Yeah,
great,
super easy.
Yeah. And then when you actually go to build your own project, that you're like, hey, I want to build like a, soccer meetup app or something, right? That you're going to run into stuff that you wouldn't run into while just following a YouTube tutorial, and there's nobody there to handhold you through it. So it's
Yeah.
really good practice to do that. I've found like I've learned so much from just building my own passion projects, because you have to find solutions to things, and sometimes they're not perfect, but you get better. Like the next time you go to do that, you're like, oh wow, that solution was dumb that I used before, but now I know a better one.
Yeah, it's really good too and helpful that I've done too is like when I'm learning something new is I'll build a project, then go back to it later
Mm,
and look at like tweaking it, fixing it,
yeah, like
optimization, security,
refactoring.
stuff like that. Stuff that I might not have thought of because I was learning at the time, but now that I know the thing better, going back and cleaning up those projects, making them sort of more advanced than they originally were is a really good practice too, because it forces you to re-encounter all those problems and just remind yourself. And you remember stuff. So when you solve your own problems, you remember it forever.
Oh yeah, for sure. Some other reasons I have here are performance needs. So, if you need something that's very performant, you'd want to use something like C or potentially Rust. Um, and so if you're using a higher level language like I don't know JavaScript, maybe it might not be the most performant thing ever. Also scalability. That's why a lot of people use Python, right? Like Python is used, I think a lot of like backends use Python for huge web apps like Facebook and social media apps, stuff like that. Um, what else?
Scalability can also be with reference to like the your backend too, in the sense of like, what kind of database you use, what structures, SQL,
Yeah,
no SQL, depending on what you're
yeah.
working with, where you're storing your app. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's something that will come up too. Like anytime if you get a job with, some company, everybody's gonna be using something different. So you're just gonna have to learn that stuff, right? Like some companies are
Yeah.
gonna use SQL, some are gonna use no SQL. So um, it's important to just, I think it's important to learn like a little bit of these things, but then if you're trying to get a job, that's where you're gonna learn a lot of stuff too. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to make a point. So I think like the one of the biggest reasons that comes up, especially with uh with earlier developers for wanting to change a language, is that they get to a point where it's uncomfortable to learn, or oftentimes they get to a point where it just seems like there's a gap between making projects and learning functions and control flow, all that stuff. So like there's basically two ways to go. Like you can go ahead and change a language, but when you change a language, you're just going to be learning the same stuff over again. Like you're just going
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
learning, if then statements somehow else. So like potentially sticking with the same language and changing your learning method. So
Mhm.
if you're learning from a book, potentially going to a video course or something on Udemy, or
Mm,
reading the documentation, or maybe just taking a break for a week, because all of these things can change your understanding of it. And you might find like, I mean, we've talked about this before, how Danny and I are both kind of book learners and you're more of a video learner. So like we love the books and you love the videos, and each of us can gain stuff
Yeah.
from them, but there's different modalities for each person.
yeah. I'm going to make one sort of final point, and this is if you're looking for a job, which I think most people are who are learning software development, there are two reasons why you might want to change a language, and they are job related, right? It's to get a job. So they may be to learn a legacy language because that puts you in an advantage, like your Fortran, right? There may not be as
Or
many
Java.
jobs, yeah, or Java. There may not be as many jobs, but there's not as many candidates for those jobs either. If you look at web development jobs, there's a ton of web developers out there. But if you look at Fortran jobs, there's very few people who could fill that role, right? So,
Like one applicant.
yeah. So that's if you want to sort of advantage when you're applying for jobs, that's one way to do it. Now, caveat to that is you better like that language because you're going to be coding in it. The other one would be for learning or future proofing, right? So learning new up and coming languages, like what I'm trying to do with like Next.js. There's not a ton of jobs out there for Next.js. And I guess theoretically, most React developers could fill that job. But if you have sort of expertise as a Next.js developer, you have a slight advantage. So those are
Oh,
Should be
on
good
that
reading.
side too, I was gonna say too, just on that note, like also if you're looking at jobs and like you're looking at certain industries, look at what their stacks are, what they use, and
Yeah.
then that might motivate you to learn something else too related to that industry. So if they really use Python or they really use JavaScript or whatever, learn it. And then you'll be a leg up applying for those jobs too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Like if you want to work for a particular company, you can find their tech stack and see what they're using and then learn that stuff
Yeah,
because that's only going to help you. So yeah, I think that's pretty good for today. I don't know if you guys have any extra closing thoughts. Happy
New
New Year's
Year.
Eve to everybody. Hope you have a good final ending to your year and looking forward to an awesome 2024 with you guys
Yes.
and the rest of the group here.
Yeah, see you in 2024.
Cool. See you guys.
Yeah.
Have a good Saturday. Oh, I got